Albert here. Time to continue our discussion of the key military theorist. We already learned about Jomini und Clausewitz. Today we will examine Alfred Thayer Mahan, an expert on sea power.
By arguing that sea power, the strength of a nation's navy, was the key to strong foreign policy, Alfred Thayer Mahan shaped American military planning and helped prompt a worldwide naval race in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Alfred Thayer Mahan was born at West Point, New York, studied at Columbia for 2 years, and finally graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1859. He served as a Union naval officer during the Civil War. He was a lecturer at the Newport War College. It was there, as a lecturer, inspired in part by a history of Rome, that he began developing his theories. In 1890, he turned his lecture notes into the book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. The book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, appeared in 1890 and was followed by another work called The Influence of Sea Power Upon the French Revolution and Empire in 1892. These works made Mahan one of the leading spokesmen for the age of imperialism. He downplayed the philanthropic side of overseas involvement and concentrated on harsh political realities. According to his analysis of history, the great powers were those that maintained strong navies and merchant marines. He urged the United States forward in its naval building program. Mahan also argued that modern navies needed repair and coaling stations. Those facilities would not be dependable if controlled by other nations. This reasoning inferred a rationale for American acquisition of port facilities throughout the world. This need for coaling stations played a major role in the events of the Spanish-American War. Teddy Roosevelt was very familiar with Mahan's work, and as Undersecretary of the Navy, set the stage for the events and aftermath of the Spanish-American War. The coaling station idea resulted in the occupation of Hawaii and the acquisition from Spain of Guam, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guantanamo Bay. Mahan was a great military theorist on sea power, but he was not such a great sailor. He feared the sea and was such a bad sailor that you would have to categorize his 40 years of naval service as accident-prone. Let's document Mahan's seamanship. On November 7, 1861, during his Civil War service, Mahan, as officer of the deck, slammed the USS Pocahontas into the Union sloop Seminole at Port Royal, South Carolina. In 1869, returning from target practice in the Pacific Ocean aboard the USS Iroquois, Mahan managed to bring his ship back into Japan's Yokohama harbor without hitting another vessel. Vanity excited, he wrote of the experience on the Iroquois, which was, however, an exception, not the rule. In 1874, Mahan ran the USS Wasp into a barge at the ship's anchorage in Uruguay. He also was responsible for doing slight damage to an Argentinian warship during a storm off Buenos Aires on November 3, 1874. More embarrassing than these accidents, however, was the time that Mahan clumsily wedged the Wasp into a dry dock caisson in Uruguay, where it remained stuck for 10 days. In 1883, soon after the Wasp incident, Mahan took command of the USS Wachusett. He managed to add to his unfortunate record. According to a young officer aboard named Hugh Rodman, Mahan managed to ram the Wachusett into a bark under sail, which without question had the right of way. It was our duty to keep clear, Rodman said. This astonishing accident, Rodman later remembered, occurred on a smooth sea in broad daylight. The greatest naval strategist the world has ever known, he wrote, was not a good seaman. By the time Mahan took charge of his last command, the USS Chicago, in 1893, he had been regularly shifted back and forth between sea duty and classroom assignments. Although he much preferred life on land, this situation helped neither his self-confidence nor his skills in navigating a ship. With each mishap at sea, Mahan felt greater stress. He often asked his wife to pray for him that he may be upheld through the remnant of the cruise. Aboard the Chicago, Captain Mahan seldom left the bridge when in the vicinity of other vessels, and his self-induced anxiety caused him constant stomach irritation. His powerful fear of the sea and possible collisions with other ships left him close to a nervous breakdown and caused him to begin to consider seriously an early retirement. On May 27, 1893, Mahan's fears were once again realized. In a minor accident, the Chicago, with Mahan on the bridge, had a brush with the USS Bancroft, a Naval Academy training ship at the New York Naval Shipyard in Brooklyn. Neither vessel was seriously damaged, but this latest mishap unnerved Mahan and kept intact his record of having grounded, collided, or otherwise embarrassed every ship save the Iroquois that he ever commanded. By early December 1894, Mahan had had enough. For several years he had been writing with much success. He knew that his greatest accomplishments would come not as a naval officer, but as a writer and historian. Few of the men who had actively served with him could argue with the logic of this conclusion. By the time of his death, in 1914, Mahan's reputation had long transcended the limited circles of the U.S. Navy. His true talents as a naval strategist and historian were borne out in the 137 scholarly articles and 20 books he had written. And The Influence of Sea Power had altered modern naval planning. As I said earlier, Mahan's call for coaling stations and repair bases played a large role in American acquisition of territory during and after the Spanish-American War. Hawaii, Guam, Puerto Rico, and Guantanamo Bay were, however, not enough to put the U.S. Navy in its best strategic position. Shifting assets from the Atlantic to the Pacific was still a major problem. But Teddy Roosevelt, a strong believer in Mahan, became president after the assassination of President McKinley in September of 1901. Roosevelt understood sea power and loved gunboat diplomacy. Roosevelt liked to repeat an old African saying, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." In Panama, Teddy proved to the world that he was willing to use his big stick navy to further American interests. He saw the canal as being vital to America's destiny as a global power, and it was this that drove him to push Congress to let him acquire the French rights to the canal. He also supported Panama's independence from Colombia. He dispatched U.S. warships to both sides of the isthmus as a show of strength to the Colombians, and also sent in U.S. troops to protect the Panamanian Railroad. These actions meant that Panama was able to declare independence from Colombia on 3 November 1903, and, not surprisingly, the Panamanians granted the canal zone to the U.S. in perpetuity. It was not ceded back to Panama until 1999. The Panama Canal, coaling stations, and naval bases played a key role in dominance of the U.S. Navy until recent times. The size of the Panama Canal locks were a restrictive force in the design of U.S. warships. During World War II, our largest battleships, the Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin, and New Jersey, were built so that they would fit inside the canal locks. Today, a modern aircraft carrier cannot pass through the canal locks. As a result, the value of the Panama Canal is diminished, and that is why the canal was returned to the Panamanians. Mahan's basic principles of naval strength and power are still valid. Technology has simply changed the application. A nuclear-powered Navy does not need coaling stations at places like Guantanamo Bay. So Guantanamo Bay's value is reduced to being a POW compound for terrorists. The need to maintain overseas naval bases has also been reduced. The U.S. Navy today can meet Mahan's primary goal of maintaining a strong worldwide naval presence without a huge inventory of overseas bases.
Well, you now have learned about Mahan, Clausewitz, und Jomini. This should give you a good background on three of the theorists. We will have a future discussion about Billy Mitchell and air power. It is time for me to get back to my study of light. I am currently working on the speed of light. Check out my experiment. Ach du Liebe! Schnell, hey? Auf Wiedersehen!